Hey guys, welcome to the Health Babes podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Becky Campbell with Dr. Crystal Hohn. Today we have Dr. Molly Maloof on. She is the author of The Spark Factor, her new book that is a really great resource when you're trying to learn how to optimize your health. We talk about the burnout epidemic. We talk about recovery and resilience, who is a good candidate for fasting and when you're a good candidate for fasting, why we can't lose weight, how we can optimize exercise. We really just dug into a lot of different things. So we hope you enjoy it. Everybody, let's welcome Dr. Molly. We're so excited to have you. And we're so excited about your book, The Spark Factor. So let's kind of just dive right in. So you talk about in the book, how we feel so run down, and about this burnout epidemic we're facing today. Can you kind of go into that?
Yeah. Okay. So first and foremost, the book is not a book on burnout treatment. That would require an entirely different book.
Yeah.
But I can speak to burnout for days because I've been burned out before and I know what it's like to be burned out. And really what this book is about understanding the fundamentals of health and understanding the fundamentals of energy capacity so that we don't end up burning out. But also I wanted to teach people about how do you even conceptualize your health? How do you create the conditions for optimal health? What do you need to do to actually understand how to conceptualize health? And then you can work on optimizing different systems. But there is an epidemic of stress, and there's an epidemic of huge sources of stress draining our batteries, creating the conditions where we get sick. And if you have the conditions of, low energy capacity to begin with, let's say you have low energy availability, you're not going to be put in the right position to actually be able to handle significant stress, because it's kind of like having your stress cup that's already almost full and then you're overflowing. Yeah. So that's typically when burnout happens, is when your capacity is not met by your demands and your body starts to break down.
Yeah. Yep. So what are some good ways that we can, measure our stress so we can manage it better?
I would say that, in terms of the way I try to conceptualize stress is first, let's think about where are your sources of stress, right? Do you have a major life stressor that's causing you to drain all of your batteries, like a divorce or lost your job, or, these are big, real acute stressors. But oftentimes what people don't realize is that these stressors can, if we have the right attitude about them, they actually can make us stronger. Mm-hmm. But one of the problems that happens when we have a big life stressor is we go and we react to it as though it's going to end. It's as though our life is ending. And really what we want to do is always aim for post-traumatic growth, and always aim for taking any of these big acute stressors and saying, okay, how can I incorporate some changes into my life to actually, cope with this reality? But that's the acute stressors. Now there's the chronic stressors that are really bad for health because they are unrelenting and they are they insidiously build problems in the body slowly over time until the one day you wake up and you're just not functioning normally. So you can tell if you have this going on, if your blood pressure is high, if your blood sugar is high, if you, generally don't have enough energy to meet your demands, then there's a really good chance that you don't have enough energy to begin with, and that your chronic stress is possibly draining your batteries on a day-to-day basis. So I try to teach people about how to think about chronic stress and how to actually create the conditions where they can, do more recovery practices and do more self-care practices to really teach a person how to improve their heart rate variability. Because heart rate variability is really the best marker we have of stress. Mm-hmm. And yet a lot of people don't track it. And if you can't change what you don't track, right? And so I recommend people really take some, first of all, just a qualitative assessment. How do I feel every day? Am I feeling the actual stress warning signals? And on my website, I'll be listing, these questionnaires, but I have questionnaires that I give my clients to help them identify, do you have big stress warning signals? And then what is your perceived stress level? Because it's one thing to have stress affecting you physically, and it's another thing to have stress that you're reacting to psychologically. Yeah. And one of the biggest challenges to handling stress is realizing that the psychological reaction we have to stress can add to the stressor. So oftentimes we have a stressful experience, but we actually go through that experience over and over and over again, and we're re-experiencing the stress over and over and over again. So I try to explain to people, you really got to learn to master your mindset if you want to be able to handle stress in this modern world that we're living in. And then lastly, I would just try to teach people about two other facets of stress that are not really commonly discussed. One is called the generalized unsafety theory of stress. And it's that when we have compromised social networks, compromised physical fitness, compromised environments, these things cause low level unsafety signaling that can build up over time, especially if there's multiple sources of generalized unsafety. So very importantly, you want to live in a quiet environment. I do apologize. There's a bit of a construction happening here in New York where I'm staying, but where I live where I live in Austin, it's very peaceful and quiet. And I made that as I definitely chose that on purpose because I was like, I really wanted to find a place that didn't have a lot of noise pollution. Serenity is really key for the nervous system to be calm. But as important as serenity is having people that you love and trust that you can spend time with, and that can really nourish your nervous system by giving you that sense of safety and trust and love. And then lastly, I would say that, it's important for people to recognize the role of trauma in draining your energy resources. A lot of what I've learned is that like people who have unresolved trauma often have overreactivity of their nervous system when they are quote unquote stressed. So if you are finding yourself, and by the way, this has been me in the past and I'm still working on it, but if you have a history of trauma of any form, whether it's sexual trauma, emotional abuse, childhood trauma, that may have wired your nervous system differently than another person. Mm-hmm. And so that may make you more hypervigilant as a baseline. So you really want to focus on healing your trauma because that's actually causing your stress reactivity. Right. And nobody really teaches you this, and like, it's like, so if you talk to people who are like, say that, oh my God, I'm so stressed out. What they really need to ask themselves is like, what is the unresolved trauma under the surface that I've actually not dealt with that's creating the nervous system that's not as resilient?
It's so true.
Yeah. And then there's all sorts of hormetic stressors, which are good stressors that can make you stronger. So I recommend sauna and cold plunge. I recommend exercise and recovery. I recommend following circadian rhythms, the sleep and the dark wake cycles. I recommend weightlifting and foam rolling. I recommend feasting and fasting. Fasting, I don't do as much fasting under chronic stress, but I do still fast when I'm not under a significant stress. Like 14 hours is a pretty good fast for me. And then I also, recommend carbohydrates and ketosis. So flipping in between carb metabolism and fat metabolism. All these things are basically toggling mitohormetic stressors, which are stressors that can make you stronger. So I teach people about how to think about tuning the mitochondria to become stronger through biohacking in this book, which is a big piece of the book.
Yeah. And you mentioned the HRV. For those that don't know what HRV is, can you go into that and what levels should look like?
Yeah. So HRV is the beat to beat variation between heartbeats. So when your heartbeat's really high and you have a high heart rate, there's not a lot of variation between those heartbeats. But when your heart rate is lower, then there's actually room for your body to adapt to any challenges you may be faced with. So Apple measures heart rate variability different than Oura Ring, but generally speaking, you want to get your baseline and then you want to see how it changes from baseline. And if it goes down 10, 20, if it goes down like 20, like 10%, 20%, you want to pay attention. But if it starts going down past 40%, that's when you need recovery. So it's actually more important to understand where your baseline is because the absolute number is going to be very different for different people. Yeah. But it is something that I personally am optimizing for. And, I've been aiming to work on getting my HRV up. And this is my goal for this year is like improving my HRV significantly.
Right. I noticed when I drank alcohol and I was wearing a whoop, holy crap, my HRV tanked the next day.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
It's terrible for sleep. It's terrible for recovery. Yeah. It's probably the worst thing you can do.
So you talked about fasting. Can we get into that a little bit more, like a little bit more detail? Like you talk about who should and who should not fast.
Yeah. Big one, right? Because a lot of people fast and they shouldn't be fasting. So if you're a woman with a history of eating disorders, unless you are really significantly healed and you really consider yourself completely past that phase of your life or that experience of being sick, you definitely shouldn't fast. Like it's not for people who have active eating disorders or have a history of eating disorders that they think that it could relapse. It's also not good for people who are burned out. People who are super burned out and or in the alarm phase of the stress response probably wouldn't recommend a lot of fasting because fasting is a stressor and you don't want to add more stress to the stress cup. I also, don't recommend fasting for people who are serious athletes who exercise a lot. Yeah. People who work out significantly. You're getting the same benefits of fasting by exercise. There's no real reason to do both. Unless you just like want to train your metabolic flexibility, which in that case, you're just going to make sure you have to eat enough after you exercise. I'm not saying athletes can't fast, but the bigger issue with a lot of female athletes is that they're not actually eating enough. And so we just want to make sure you're getting enough energy availability, because a lot of female athletes undereat. And so fasting could contribute to low energy availability and relative energy deficiency of sport, which is a condition that can occur when you don't eat enough energy for your demands. And then, I would definitely consider, if I would consider fasting really good for people with insulin resistance, pre-diabetes, diabetes, polycystic ovarian disorder. But again, if you have these conditions, you may have to change your medications if you start fasting, because it can actually act like a medication. It can reverse a lot of these conditions.
Yeah.
So I don't recommend people start it without asking their doctor's permission. And then, for people who are sedentary, fasting is fantastic because it's basically doing what a lot of exercise does. So I do tell people, if you do want to fast and you're sedentary, it's a great substitute for exercise. But really what I want to recommend people do in the book is actually go through a sequence of developing metabolic flexibility by first eliminating processed foods if they can, cutting back on sugar, refined carbs, and then cutting back on snacking, and then starting to attempt fasting so that they can become more metabolically flexible, but slowly adding fasting into their lives rather than overnight just starting to do 16-8, because that may actually cause problems for you, especially if you don't easily tap into your fat stores. So just keep in mind that if you're not at all metabolically flexible and you just start to fast, you may bonk, just like when you're exercising and you run out of fuel. So the reason why that happens is because you're not fat adapted. And if you're not fat adapted, then you're not going to tap into your battery power, your fat stores to make ketones.
Yeah, exactly. And what are your thoughts on with patients who are extremely burnt out, or people who are, burnt out with carbs? What's your thoughts on that?
Oh, I think most importantly, if you're really burned out, the most important thing that you do is you actually eat regular meal times and actually eat carbs consistently.
Mm-hmm.
Like I actually mentioned this somewhere in the book where I'm like, regular meal timing, adequate carbohydrates, like you want to make sure you have enough food to meet your demands if you're burned out. So regular meal timing is really key. And I actually have on my website an HPA axis dysfunction protocol that goes into this. It did get cut from the book, but I really regretted it because it's actually probably one of the more important things that should have been in the book.
Isn't that hard though? There's so much that you want to put in there, right?
Yeah, but it's going to be on the website, so that'll be helpful.
Yeah. And, when it comes with burnout, how should we optimize exercise?
Yeah. So for exercise, I would just do more gentle exercises like yoga and walking. And really, if you're fully burned out, literally zero energy left, you can do some weightlifting, but you just got to make sure you do more moderate intensity rather than high intensity. Yeah. And I wouldn't do any HIIT training.
We see nightmares with that.
We do.
Just adds more stress. You got to be careful.
Absolutely.
With your hormones.
And speaking of that, so let's talk about your cycle. So how can we lean into our menstrual cycle for exercise?
Yeah. A big one that I try to recommend women do is really think about when you're menstruating, the very beginning of your menstruation is the beginning of your cycle. You may not feel super up to doing a lot of exercise when you're heavy bleeding or bleeding, but near the end of your menstrual phase, you actually have lowest hormones levels. And so you actually perform at your best. So it's actually a great time to exercise near the end of your menstruation and beginning of follicular phase, especially for performance.
Yeah.
But then your follicular phase is a great phase for higher intensity exercise because you've got more estrogen, so you're more insulin sensitive. And then near the end of the phase, your luteal phase, for example, past your ovulation, you're going to find that you're going to be more fat, you're going to metabolize fat more effectively. So moderate intensity exercise is great for your luteal phase. And it's just a phase where you're going to feel more calm and relaxed anyway. So I just wouldn't aim for your personal best when your body's designed to burn fat, and just focus on working with your body rather than against it.
What do you think about weight training during ovulation? A lot of people say, when your testosterone is at its highest, that's a really good time to lean into weight training. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that I personally do a lot of my heavier lifts during follicular and ovulation. You just got to be careful to protect your tendons and make sure if you're doing any power training, really intense, jumps and things like that, like CrossFit type exercises, just be careful not to injure yourself.
Mhm.
Yeah. How is our metabolism tied to our emotional health?
Oh my God. So I just finished a paper with these students from Harvard on the relationship between metabolic health and mental health. But fundamentally, your stress response system is regulating your nervous system to try to keep you alive during threat. So oftentimes when people are the most imbalanced is when they're under the most stress. But when we're under a lot of stress, people often very much stress eat, or they even stress under eat, right? So your body becomes dysfunctional under stress, often in an attempt to protect yourself and adapt to the stress. So what I try to teach people is like, no amount of food is going to fix your emotions if you're stressed out. So what you really want to do is you want to nourish your body and really try to feed your body food that's very nourishing and really nurture your nervous system and really take care of yourself. It's just key that you don't overdo it.
Yeah.
Because that stress is going to cause your body to become more insulin resistant and higher cortisol and hold on to fat more effectively.
Yeah. Cause I know you talk about like not being able to lose weight when you're stressed. So that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
It's like, you don't even try, wait till the stress, wait till the storm clears.
Right. Work on the stress first and foremost. Yeah. We talk about it a lot. We talk about addressing your trauma and your stress, like it's just important as diet is. It really is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So what are your thoughts on the continuous glucose monitors to help manage blood sugar?
Well, I'm wearing one right now and it's funny. I get a lot of questions about CGM because I was one of the first doctors to start using these clinically in 2014. So I was like very early to this space. And I spent years working with companies that were commercializing these. So I know a lot about the ins and outs of this technology. And I really believe it's a really important window into your metabolic health and your lifestyle, because it reflects your sleep, it reflects your movement, your stress, what you eat, when you eat, if you don't eat, what you do for exercise, your environment. It just really is a good reflection of your overall, your overall metabolic health and how that's adapting to the world around you.
It's so true.
With that said, with that said, I definitely have tried. There was a time during the pandemic when I was like, maybe CGMs just like aren't necessary and I just like shouldn't use them and just like I should just go intuitively. And I gained a bunch of weight and I started eating like a normal person and I like fell off a lot of my habits. So for me, it's a really important tool for just making sure that I stay accountable to my diet. And I know it sounds crazy, but like for me, I do better when I have data to back up my decisions. And when I see like, oh yeah, that's the amount of rice I can eat to actually not spike my blood sugar. Oh, that's the serving of pasta that works for me. Like, and then like, I'll eat like twice as much another time and I can see the spike and it's like, Molly, you now know, like, that's not the serving size for you, and it just keeps me accountable. It keeps me like paying attention to what I think is best for my body. And so having gone with it and without it, I prefer life with it. And like, frankly, I would love to have one implanted in me. So someday we'll see.
I know.
I posted about when I was wearing the levels one, I posted about it and I got a lot of people who are upset, like diabetics.
I know.
And
they get so defensive.
They're upset. And I'm like, it's not what you're thinking. We're saying it is a really important tool, whether you are diabetic or not, because even stress can show up on that thing big time. And it's really helpful to help you to like prevent things and manage your blood sugar is important to manage whether you have diabetes or not. So I think
you don't want to get diabetes.
Right. Exactly.
Like, what if you don't want to get it? What if you're like, I don't want to get sick. I don't want to get prediabetes. What if you already have prediabetes? And the doctor says, well, you can't have a CGM. And it's like, but Dr. Molly says it'll help me track my lifestyle. And the truth is it will. And so the thing with the diabetics is that the reason why they get upset is because they don't feel that we should have to wear these, because they feel that they're usually very resentful that they have to wear them at all.
Yeah.
And so they're like, I think there's this weird thing where they wish they didn't have to use them. And then here we all come in saying, oh my God, we want to use these things. And they're like, wait. You shouldn't need to use those. These things suck, you know? And it's like, no, they are awesome. We love them. And they're all like, I think there's this weird cognitive dissonance inside a lot of people where they're like, you don't have our condition, so you don't deserve these things. And it's like, no, we don't want to get your condition. And we would try to avoid getting it. And I believe that these are potentially preventative for prediabetes and diabetes too. Now,
100%.
diabetes 1, you have to wear them.
Right.
That's an autoimmune condition. That's not your choice. You don't get that out of the blue. I mean, like you get that out of the blue, and it can even happen as an adult where you can get autoimmune diabetes.
Right.
But that doesn't, just because you have an autoimmune condition that forces you to have to wear these does not mean that those of us who voluntarily wear them are somehow wrong.
Right. I agree, because it is a really helpful tool. It can tell you a lot of things. It can tell you what foods are just the best support for you. And it's not all about that. So yeah. Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about human connection, because you talk about it being the ultimate biohack. So can you explain that?
Yes. I mean, let me give you some interesting stats. 1 in 7 men and 1 in 12 women have no friends. And loneliness is literally worse for your health than smoking 15 cigarettes a day, being obese, and not exercising. Wow. So all of those things are bad for you. And loneliness is worse. So if that's the case, then why are we not paying attention to loneliness?
Yeah.
Because it's clearly a problem, but loneliness is actually a hunger signal. It's like a pain signal. It's designed to get you to move and to actually move you closer to your tribe. So we don't have a loneliness epidemic. We have a disconnection epidemic. We have an isolation epidemic. And we need to reverse this immediately if we're going to actually help people live long and healthy lives. And so that's when I started becoming obsessed with human connection, because I was like, well, social connection is the greatest factor that we know in longevity and happiness. Mm-hmm. If that's the case, then why are we not trying to optimize it? So I just got really, obsessed with the topic. So I started digging into the science of love, and I was like, wow, the reason why social connection is so good for us is because love is literally linked to longevity, because the hormone oxytocin is literally nature's medicine. So it's an anti-inflammatory, it's an antioxidant. It protects the heart, it protects the mitochondria, and it makes you feel good. You feel safe and trusted and loved when you're with someone that you're bonded to.
So true. Friends are so important. The best medicine, seriously.
Friends and
laughing
and
all that.
It's so true. Yeah. Why so many people, like around COVID time, with feeling isolated and stress levels were so high. It's just, you really do need to have that social connection.
Yeah.
So why don't you go ahead, Beck?
I was just going to say, so why don't you kind of walk us through your book a little bit? Because it's a really interesting book. So for those who don't know anything about the book, like what are the key points you'd want them to know that would make them want to get this book?
I'd say the key points would be, it's really important to have a general understanding of how mitochondria work if you want to have optimal health. So it's really important to recognize like stress drains your batteries. If you have a lot of stress, you need to deal with that and address that with the framework I gave you. It goes into the gut health and the gut, sort of like the microbiome, mitochondria crosstalk. That's really important to understand the relationship between mitochondria and gut health. It goes into why women often find weight loss resistance when they're really stressed out, and they often feel overwhelmed and they're like, why can't I lose weight? It's like, well, there's a scientific reason for this. And then it goes into movement and metabolism, because movement is literally the secret to longevity. Yeah. Like VO2 max is one of the best markers for longevity, and like grip strength is really important if you want to avoid frailty. So I talk all about, a framework for thinking about fitness. And then I get into human connection at the end of the book. And then metabolism is really the cornerstone of this book. It's like, how do you optimize your metabolic health?
Yeah, awesome. I love that. So where else can people find you, Molly?
My Instagram at drmolly.co, my website, www.drmolly.co. And that's probably the best place to find me.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. This has been great. And you guys have to pick up her book. It is really good. So it's just kind of a guide for so many things to really optimize your health. So grab her book. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. And if you love this episode, please leave a review. It only takes a couple minutes. And you can find out more about us on drbeckycampbell.com. And you can follow us over at Instagram on @HealthBabesPodcast, @Dr. Becky Campbell, and @Dr. Crystal Hohn. Have an amazing day.